Thanks. I'm here to talk today about a departure that has a fair amount of return associated with it, a bit of a round trip, if you will. At Hyatt, we're returning to our founding sense of purpose. It's about much more than just making a profit, operating hotels. It's really about caring for the human spirit. It's about caring for our people, elevating their spirits, and in our current circumstance, rewriting a culture of compliance as a culture of empathy, ownership, and accountability. That's pretty conceptual, so I think I'll give you a couple of examples to explain what I'm talking about. Last week, I happened to be in Austin, Texas, at the Hyatt Regency Lost Pines Resort at a conference. And among the other participants in this conference was Walter Robb, pictured here on the left. He's co-CEO of Whole Foods Market. Now, Walter's a vegetarian, and he's got a pretty strict regimen about what he eats. And at the buffet line at lunch one day during the conference, he was looking around and increasingly dismayed because there were plenty of vegetables, to be sure, but they were mostly cooked in oil or in butter. They had seasoning in it, and he wasn't able to find something that he actually could eat and enjoy. Courtney, pictured here on the right, is the banquet captain who noticed that Walter was clearly out of sorts. So he walked up to Walter and to try to find out what was happening, and they talked, and through that established a connection. Courtney was able to really understand what Walter really needed, and through that came up with some ideas, shared them with Walter, came back within a few minutes with a beautifully presented plate of food, cooked exactly the way that Walter needed it to be cooked in order to maintain his regimen and maintain his energy. And this sounds incredibly simple, and of course it is. And many of you may even be sitting back and saying, well, that's Courtney's job, after all. But Walter, who knows a little bit about creating an experience within a store, was really struck by this. And he was amazed at how it was handled with empathy, care, and imagination, so much so that he actually texted me and said, Mark, I don't know where you are, but I've got to introduce you to Courtney. You don't know Courtney, but you got to meet him. And the fact that he so quickly reached out to acknowledge and recognize that something special had happened was really a huge signal to me that empathy, translated through doing something about it, action, and caring for others, can have a huge impact no matter how simple the gesture is. And I'm sure if something like this happened to you every time you came to a Hyatt hotel, you'd probably be drawn to go to Hyatt first. And by the way, just to make clear that this wasn't a one-off example, the next morning I was sitting at a table eating some breakfast, and Walter walks up and puts down his very large bowl of oatmeal with almond milk in it, with almond shavings on top. And I looked at it. He clearly recognized that I didn't see that at the buffet table, and he looked over at me and smiled and just said, Courtney. So my next example is something that happened at the Park Hyatt in Chennai in India. And I was there a few weeks ago, and the owner, the developer of the hotel, had a son who was very involved in the process. His name is Amit, and he's in his late 20s, very accomplished young man, and very involved in the development of the hotel, and especially this magnificent restaurant we have there. It's 5 levels, 6 different kitchens. You can get cuisine from any part of the world and order it all together at the same time. Very complicated operating model to be able to deliver that. So they were assembling people, this was about 6 months ago, to staff this very complicated and very high-end experience. This restaurant has now become the talk of India, actually. A lot of people are flocking to Chennai just to experience it. And during the course of this, Amit met these two. On the left is Ali, and on the right is Kimmy. And they were really warm individuals, but quite withdrawn. And Amit didn't really understand it because they sort of had a magnetic presence about them, but they weren't really engaging. And it turned out, after his inquiry, that Ali suffered from a terrible lisp, so much so that he really couldn't express himself. And Kimmy, in like manner, had a real speech impediment. Now, it turns out, luckily, that Amit had a background in the theater. And he suggested to our head of food and beverage that maybe we need to get a voice coach, an elocution coach, and help them along. Now, we could have just said, you know what? We've got so many applicants for this job. This has got to be a really special environment. Let's just go get people who can actually express themselves. But instead, Amit and our team recognized the special spirit in these two. And they dedicated themselves and really applied effort to get them over their challenges. And within a few weeks, and if any of you have seen Colin Firth and the King's Speech, you know how painful this can be. But in a few weeks, they each made a breakthrough. And during this period of time, Ali had admitted to Amit that his secret desire, his great goal, was to be able to serve a table, to interact with a guest, and be able to express himself, because they both suffered from a lack of self-confidence as a result of their challenges. And so as things progressed and as they became more and more comfortable and ended up with breakthroughs in their ability to express themselves, Ali did become a server. He was so good that he was assigned to a pretty big area, but he was often lingering at the table side, chit-chatting away, because he was unleashed and liberated from his prior challenge, and they had to coach him in the other direction and say, Ali, you know, you actually have to serve more tables, so we've got to get you back in the productivity mode. So he was completely liberated, and his life was really transformed from that point. Kimmy, in a most unlikely development, ended up being assigned to be the host of this restaurant, so she's the first person you would encounter. Quite extraordinary. But make no mistake about it, in my conversation with Amit, what I realized is that he was transformed too. This is actually the spirit in which Hyatt was founded 55 years ago. And it would be great if that kind of emotional connectedness actually occurred every time that we had an interaction with one of our colleagues or one of our guests. The problem is that we've neglected that spirit and that special purpose, and we haven't made it central to everything that we do every day. Instead, we've standardized around operating procedures and brand standards. Now, mind you, and we've created a culture of compliance, and it's all grounded in commercial sensibility. The theory goes, if you open hotels, especially five-star luxury hotels, in markets in which people don't have an experience of what that looks like, you have to train them. You have to train them extensively, and you have to script them. And you have to lay out the service sequences in great detail, lest they make a mistake, because, of course, they don't really know. And when you do that, you sow the seeds of what becomes a sea of sameness across the brands in our industry. Now, there's hope. A little over a year ago, I was interacting with a group of general managers and team members from laboratory hotels that we established around the world to actually experiment around how we could do things differently. And in the course of that discussion, what became clear to all of us, because it became a group dialogue, was that care was actually at the center of how all of those people, my colleagues, defined their belief in our company, in our brand. It was caring for one another and caring for others as well. And I was really inspired. I asked them if they could imagine living a life at work that was dedicated to caring for the human spirit. And they said, absolutely. In fact, that's why we've joined the industry. So I walked out of there completely inspired and terrified, because I realized that our organization, the metrics that we use to measure what we do, and our culture were largely not prepared and oriented to serve that purpose. So the challenge, of course, is that we've got to make caring for the human spirit the guiding principle for everything that we do in the company. We have to make it relevant and real for over 90,000 people in 46 countries speaking dozens of different languages. We have to use it to actually spurn radical innovation to really make sure that we actually connect with people, not serve them according to a script. We have to give our teams time, permission, and resources to actually apply themselves primarily in the service of that higher purpose, not primarily in the operation and administration of a hotel. And finally, I have to explain to our board and to our investors why this is actually the most compelling way in which we can differentiate who we are and what we do. And I would say that the translation of that into action and into a activation across our company is really the journey that we're on right now. I was reflecting on this, and I thought about a talk that was given on this stage 1 year ago by Deborah Kenney, who is founder and CEO of the Harlem Village Academies. And in that talk, she described her frustration with an education system that was coming out of a compliance bureaucracy, that is, scripting teachers because you couldn't trust them to actually fulfill the right purpose in advancing learning, and had advanced into an evaluation bureaucracy, that is, measure everything. And what she was calling for at that time was a transition to an ownership culture, that is, one in which you reinstill the ownership and accountability for learning for each and every child into the teacher's hands, not through a script and not through a test. This is the website for Harlem Village Academies. You can see that the celebratory feeling of instilling that sense of purpose back into their teachers releases their passion. That's actually the theory, and when practiced, translates into great results. Now, the difficulty is it takes some time for this to all happen. And the good news is that we've already begun the journey. And one example I can give you is our team in London, the Hyatt Regency at the Churchill in central London, sort of evaluated how we were organized and whether we were actually aligned to be able to connect with our guests, understand what was going on with them, and then serve them. And they realized that we weren't, so they started with a blank sheet of paper. And just to give you a sense of the scale of the transformation that we have ahead of us, they took an organizational structure that had 35 siloed departments, and out of that created 7 interdependent teams. They eliminated an entire management layer in the hotel to bring everyone closer together and closer to the guest and to each other. And they started assigning people to really read and see each guest as they came in to understand what was going on with them and what we could do for them, in the same way that Courtney was serving Walter. And the momentum that this has created and the energy that this has created is quite amazing. Now, it's very challenging and difficult to do, but that's the nature, and that's what it looks like on the ground. And that's a single hotel out of over 500 that we have around the world. For me, leading this effort is a personal departure. I have a background in investing in a private equity environment. I know deals very well. Cultural transformation, slightly out of my wheelhouse. So one of the things that I was forced to do is actually look at myself. So I and my team members, my senior leadership team members, got together and we did assessments to understand how we were hardwired. And let's just say that I was a little surprised and dismayed that my empathy score was not among the highest. In fact, it was among the lowest. Now, I did what any sane and rational person would do, and I dismissed the data. I said, well, obviously it can't be right. Of course, what I then realized is this isn't really about whether I'm wired to be empathetic or not. What I realized is that you can be empathetic if you go towards it, if you're intentional about it. And what I found in that was incredible response. I got energy back from people in a way that I've never experienced before. It made me a better CEO. It made me a better parent. It made me a better spouse. It made me a better person. And I thought, this is seriously powerful stuff. Now, we have some obstacles, okay? We've got inertia. We've got a lot of inertia. It turns out that when you look at the metrics that you would measure our progress by, and you compare that to things that, if you compare us to our principal competitors, we're doing really well in every category. Virtually every area that you can do a comparison between us and our primary competitors, we're doing as well or better than our competitors. So we don't have a crisis on our hands. Now, I'm not asking for a crisis, but it does create a sense of inertia that is a powerful force unto itself. And the second thing that we've got is we've got uncertainty about the results. You see, businesses are really talented and very skilled at measuring financial outcomes. But measuring emotional connectivity and measuring the impact that you're having on a human being, that's really difficult to put into a metric. So when you've got inertia, and you combine that with uncertainty about how to measure the result, that leads to skepticism. And we've got our fair share of skeptics, I can tell you. But the antidote to skepticism is belief. And I believe that we are absolutely on the right path because I've seen the power of authentic human connection. So Hyatt is really on a path back to its founding sense of spirit and higher purpose. I'm personally on a path to an exciting departure. I didn't really expect to be leading a crusade, and I certainly didn't expect to be on the stage talking to you all about it. I'm not really sure where the journey leads at this point. What I do know is that hotels are really special places where powerful and authentic human connections are made. And I'm also sure that what I saw in Amit's eyes was a person transformed through the transformation of others. And that's really real. And the same is true for Walter and Courtney. I've had colleagues of mine come and tell me about stories that they've experienced, discussions with guests who ended up in tears talking about the impact that one of our team members had on their lives. And to me, that assures me that we can actually make a material difference in the world. And I think if we accomplish that, I'm also confident that it'll make Hyatt one of the most loved brands. For me, like for Deborah Kenny, what I'm most interested in is the personal connection, that personal individual transformation, and that's a conversation I'd love to continue. Thank you.